It is the Resistance Report for March 20th, 2017. Believe it or not, it was January 20th, something like 8 weeks ago, that Donald Trump became the President of the United States. I know it seems an eternity, but it really was just 2 months ago. And so we have a day like today where two separate committees in two separate chambers of Congress had very important hearings. What I would like to do, as we want to do here on the Resistance Report, is provide you with context, connecting the dots, let you see behind the surface what's really going on. Now, congressional committees have hearings for a variety of reasons, and sometimes Democrats and Republicans have slightly different agendas. The House Intelligence Committee today had a hearing. It was the first hearing looking at Russian interference in the United States election and also possible Trump aid or even Trump involvement. And James Comey, the head of the FBI, was the lead witness. The two big stories, and you already see them in the headlines. James Comey said, number one, that indeed the FBI is investigating Russia's meddling in the presidential election, including possible links between Trump campaign and Moscow. That is a big deal because up until now we haven't had actual testimony under oath specifying that the FBI is undertaking that investigation. Now, the background condition here and the big context is this. The FBI would not start an investigation for no reason. In fact, the threshold for the FBI beginning such an investigation is having credible evidence that Russia involved itself in the United States election and that Trump or his aides were somehow involved in that. That's a big deal. The fact that the FBI has had credible evidence of that. It also started its investigation last July. Now, that's also important to keep in mind. This investigation has been ongoing for quite some time. The other thing that came out today with regard to that House Intelligence Committee briefing, the hearing, and James Comey, was he said that the FBI had absolutely no evidence that Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, had wiretapped or any way engaged in surveillance of the Trump Tower in the run-up to the presidential election. Comey said specifically that the FBI had no information to support Trump's claim. In other words, big story, Donald Trump, President of the United States, lied to the American people. He has not come up with a shred of evidence to support his allegation that, in fact, his predecessor, Barack Obama, did wiretap or otherwise impose some sort of surveillance on Trump Tower. Now, I don't have to remind you, or maybe I do, some of you, that it is an impeachable offense to undertake what would otherwise be called a high crime or a misdemeanor, or basically fail to follow one's oath of office to faithfully execute the law. A case can be made on the basis of James Comey's testimony today that Donald Trump failed to faithfully execute the law when he essentially made up the story that his predecessor, Barack Obama, wiretapped him with no evidence, no supporting evidence whatsoever. Now, bear in mind those two big stories, that in fact there is an investigation of Trump's aides in connection with the Russian interference in the 2016 election, and also that Trump lied to the American people a few weeks ago when he said that, in fact, Barack Obama, his predecessor, wiretapped him. We are now in the twilight zone, folks. We have never been here before. Richard Nixon came about as close to as we have now come to this weird zone where a president is found to have lied and the FBI is actively investigating what is clearly an impeachable offense. By the way, Trump this morning tried to put his own spin on all of this when, in a series of tweets, he decried the accusations of collusion with Russia as quote-unquote fake news. He has done that before, being pushed by defeated Democrats and also arguing at the same time that the scandal is really the leaking of sensitive information from within the intelligence community. He said, quote, "must find the leaker now," exclamation point, in one tweet. But you see the internal logical problem that Trump now faces. Because if the information is sensitive and its release and leak compromises national security, then it must be true. The only way it compromises national security is if the information that is being leaked is true. So it can't be fake news. It's true news. If it's fake news, then there is no compromise of national security. Now, the purpose of the House Intelligence Committee hearings, Republicans had slightly different purpose than the Democrats, and you saw that if you listened to what the Republicans asked. Most of it was about trying to minimize the damage that the FBI was coming up with in terms of information about a whole slew of contacts between Trump advisors and Russian operatives. It was a preemptive strike on the part of a lot of the Republican members of the House there on that committee, trying to suggest that, of course, anybody could have contacts with Russians. But, of course, that is going to be a more and more slender thread, because over time, more and more information is sure to come out about more and more of those contacts. The Democrats had a slightly different agenda, and I believe that the best agenda, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, the really underlying agenda here is to lay a predicate. By that I mean a justification for a bipartisan select committee and the appointment of an independent special prosecutor to get to the bottom of all of this. It is not possible to get to the bottom of all of this through either congressional committees that are run by Republicans or through an FBI run by James Comey. Now, remember, James Comey is the same person who came out with allegations against Hillary Clinton about the emails he had not even seen yet that turned out to be duplicates just days before the election, while knowing at the same time that Trump's people were possibly committing treason. So there is no reason we should trust James Comey to lead the investigation into Trump and Russia. The lesson that anybody should take from today's hearing before the House Intelligence Committee is that with so much at stake, and also with the FBI last July hitting that threshold of credible evidence of Russian interference and Trump aides being implicated in that Russian interference in the 2016 election on behalf of Trump, that is enough to trigger a bipartisan select committee and an independent special prosecutor. And that is what you ought to be telling your members of Congress through your indivisible group or by yourself say that over and over again. It is time now for a select committee, bipartisan, and for an independent special prosecutor. It's the only way we get to the bottom of this. We now have enough reason to believe that there was something fundamentally wrong, not only with the 2016 election, but also credible evidence that Trump and or his aides were involved in Russian interference that affected the outcome of the election. If that's not grounds for an independent special prosecutor and a bipartisan select committee, I frankly don't know what grounds you need. This is the most serious and most damaging allegation about American democracy and foreign interference in American democracy and the potential collusion of one of the candidates with that foreign interference in American history. It goes to the very heart of what our democracy is all about. Which brings me to another committee hearing today, the other big one that occurred before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the nomination by Donald Trump of Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court. Now here is the context, and here is the important point in my view. Neil Gorsuch cannot be defeated on the basis of his credentials or views. Republicans have too many votes. It is not going to be possible for Democrats to filibuster on the basis of his lack of adequate credentials. He is an eminent jurist on the basis of his credentials. If we're fighting over credentials, that's the end game. That is going to be a losing strategy. Even trying to find out what his views are is almost a losing strategy, because he is going to do what every Supreme Court does during hearings when he's asked for his views. He's going to do the equivalent of pleading the Fifth Amendment. But when just judges or future justices do this, it's called, I basically don't want to answer that, Your Honor, because I'm going to possibly have cases that raise those questions, and I don't want to prejudge those cases. That is what every person who is nominated for the Supreme Court says. So the Democrats will not have a leg to stand on if they go after his credentials or even his values and attitudes and perspectives and views. That is not going to be the way, in any way, to get the votes necessary to defeat Neil Gorsuch. I believe the Democrats ought to not focus on Neil Gorsuch, but focus on the person who nominated Neil Gorsuch. And remind America, number one, that President Barack Obama nominated an excellent justice, Merrick Garland. But Senate Republicans would not even consider Merrick Garland because they said Obama had no legitimate basis for making such a nomination because he was in his last year of office. This was a new doctrine Republicans put forward. There was not even a hearing on Merrick Garland. The Republicans in the Senate said, no, a Republican cannot be, a Republican, in fact, almost invariably is going to be justice because a Democratic nominee cannot be nominated by a Democratic president in the last year of the Democratic president's office. The nomination of Merrick Garland, I want to remind you, languished before the Senate for 293 days. That is more than twice as long as any other Supreme Court nomination in American history. Mitch McConnell and the Republican leaders of the Senate simply refused to accept the legitimacy of Barack Obama's appointment, of his nomination. Now, Neil Gorsuch has been nominated by a president whose own legitimacy in nominating a Supreme Court justice is far more questionable than Obama's. As I said before, today, James Comey, FBI director, made clear the FBI is investigating Trump's campaign, possibly Trump himself, and also made very clear that Trump lied just a few weeks ago when he said that Barack Obama had wiretapped him in Trump Tower. The ranking member, Democrat of the House Intelligence Committee, says circumstantial evidence already links Trump aides to the Russian operatives. So you see, if Barack Obama could not legitimately, in the Republicans' eyes, have a confirmation hearing in his entire last year of office, with Merrick Garland's nomination languishing for 293 days, unheard of, why is it that a president over whom there is a serious cloud of illegitimacy can have his nominee looked at when the issue of illegitimacy is a major one for Donald Trump? Not only with regard to an active FBI investigation, which, if it shows his involvement, will be an impeachable offense, but it is also true that Trump's legitimacy is under question because he is clearly, actively taking money from foreign governments. That is a violation of the Constitution's Emoluments Clause, Article 1, Section 9. He won't release his tax returns. Several courts have already found him acting unconstitutionally in creating what is essentially a religious test for entry into the United States. There are therefore several grounds for impeachment or possible impeachment. No nominee for the Supreme Court by Donald Trump should be considered until this cloud of illegitimacy hanging over the Trump presidency is removed. I do not think that that should be an unreasonable position for the Democrats to take. To the contrary, I think that they should push Republicans on why it's illegitimate, or it was illegitimate, for Barack Obama to have a Supreme Court hearing on his nomination for 293 days, but it's perfectly legitimate for a president, when an FBI investigation is ongoing about that president's possible involvement in foreign interference on his behalf, to become president of the United States, as well as all of these other potential impeachable offenses are hanging over that president. I'm sorry. That's wrong. So you see, in other words, how today's two hearings, one in the House and one in the Senate, are intimately connected. Here again, you need to contact your members of Congress, either alone or with your indivisible group. Make sure your members of Congress know if you agree that there should not be a vote on the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch unless or until this cloud of illegitimacy over the Trump presidency is removed. And now your questions. Miles Westergreen, how has it gotten this far with all the blatant controversy, and why hasn't this administration been locked up or exiled to a deserted island? Well, Miles, it's called Republican politics. Republicans are in control of both houses of Congress. This is why you and others also need to get busy with regard to the 2018 midterm elections. Get busy in terms of getting involved. The primaries are coming up. In fact, there are a number of primaries I'll be talking with you about shortly that are happening just in a few weeks. Jeff White. If it is proven that a foreign power has indeed interfered with and therefore corrupted the election process, is there a point where the election results become invalidated? Jeff, the Constitution, again, my handy-dandy Constitution of the United States, does not provide for that. It provides for impeachment, or it provides for a president being basically kicked out of office under the 25th Amendment, which is not having the capacity, the mental capacity, to go on with the presidency. But the worst that can happen here for Donald Trump is he is impeached. Obviously, there's worse than that, because if he actually was engaged and involved with Russia in a plot to gain the election of 2016 for himself, then that's worse than impeachment. He is liable for being indicted in a criminal indictment as a traitor. But what Congress does and what the president does up until that point remains. Geophile, is that Geophile? Is that your name? If the FBI and Congress conclude from their investigations that Trump colluded with Russia and they do start the impeachment process, would that take down Pence as well? What would that look like? No, it would not take down Pence. Pence would become the president of the United States. When a president is impeached and convicted of impeachment, I want to make sure you understand the process. It goes to the House. The House of Representatives comes up with an article of impeachment. It is voted on in the House. It then goes to the Senate for a conviction of impeachment. If there is a conviction of impeachment, then the president no longer is in office. The office is then vacated, and automatically the Vice President of the United States becomes president. Several of you have said over time, you are just as worried about Mike Pence because he is a right-wing fanatic. Well, let me beg to differ with you respectfully, and that is, I would rather have a right-winger as president than a sociopath who's dangerous. Next question. Kelly Schultz-Stambaugh. How can we pressure Congress to, in turn, pressure the FBI, National Security Agency, to prioritize their investigation in order to get indictments and or impeachment? Kelly, I assure you that this is a priority. But what worries me is that James Comey still has a question mark hanging over his head in terms of his nonpartisanship. His behavior during the campaign was, it seems to me, highly questionable. And also he does report to the Deputy Attorney General, even if Jeff Sessions says that he is recusing himself. I don't completely trust that recusal. Jeff Sessions did lie to Congress. And then you have the entire Justice Department, including the FBI, under the command of Donald Trump. And that's why there has to be a bipartisan select committee and an independent special prosecutor. This is from Debbie Darwin. If he released his taxes, would this all be solved? No, Debbie, it wouldn't all be solved. What we would know if he released all of his taxes, now that 2-page tax form that Rachel Maddow showed from 2005 doesn't really show very much. It doesn't show the critical backup material. Anybody who does taxes and doesn't do kind of a simplified form includes a lot of other deductions, including any interest paid on loans. And you have to show the source of the loans. It would be very useful to know, for example, whether Donald Trump owes Russian oligarchs a lot of money. in my personal opinion, having gone through all of the materials that have been published, it would seem that he does. He has gone into bankruptcy a very large number of times, and so it's probably very hard for him to get money directly from a United States bank or a United States creditor, and therefore there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that he had to go directly or indirectly to Russian oligarchs. If he did, then that is one piece of evidence that might explain what's going on. The FBI does have the power to subpoena his tax returns. So if the FBI is doing its job, and we don't know that and can't absolutely be sure of that, but if it's doing its job, it can get hold of Trump's returns. Question from Valerie Bale. Comey confuses me. Well, it confuses me, Valerie, as well. Why did he come out about Hillary's email, thereby swinging the election to Trump, knowing that Trump was under investigation already for colluding with Russia? Valerie, I don't know. I can tell you what he says publicly. He says publicly that he had an obligation to the public to tell the public when he was opening an investigation or closing an investigation, and that there was new evidence in the last weeks of the 2016 election suggesting that that evidence had not yet been reviewed by the FBI about Hillary Clinton. Proved to be a complete hoax. And that leads me to your same question. How can we entirely trust James Comey? Allison Todd. Yeah, can we even trust Comey? Allison, you anticipated exactly what I said. Mark Toscano, regardless of the wiretapping testimonies today, I wonder what your thoughts are on the transfer of power, soft power, to China, and how that affects all this make America great again, but hurts us in the long term. Now, Mark, I assume that what you're talking about when you're talking about the transfer of soft power to China, what you're saying is that the United States is giving up a lot of its not military power, but its power to influence the rest of the world. And it's giving up that power to influence the rest of the world because it has somebody as president of the United States who is not only turning many other countries skeptical, making them skeptical of the United States, making them worry about the United States' reliability, making foreign powers, even our allies, concerned about whether the United States is going to be there for them. Donald Trump keeps on talking about the possibility that he's not going to support, and the United States is not going to support NATO. His comments about Germany owing the United States money for defending Europe were absolutely insane, absurd, revealed a complete arrogance and ignorance about NATO and how NATO works. So what you're saying is essentially the United States is giving up a lot of its influence in the world, and China is sort of taking up the slack. I'm not sure that's true, but it does hurt us in the long run. And if the United States cuts the State Department budget by 25%, but increases dramatically by 25% the military budget, that is also a very clear signal to the rest of the world, we don't care about diplomacy any longer. Walter Wagner, could Obama sue for slander? Walter, the answer is no. You can't sue a public official for slander, particularly if you are or have been a public official or a public personality. Leslie Gannett, well, I suppose you could try, but you're not going to get anywhere in court. Leslie Gannett, any suggestions on how to push back on senators who refuse to meet with their constituents? Leslie, one thing that the Indivisible group suggests is you very publicly hold a meeting, ostensibly with your representative when your representative is back in your district.